Good evening and welcome to BATV News. I'm Andrew Lately. Opposition spokesman on finance and planning Mark Golding says the government's offer to public sector workers is an insult. He says the finance minister is well aware that workers will not be able to make a reasonable living on the current offer the government is making. The opposition spokesman made his contribution to the budget debate in Parliament today. More in this report. Opposition spokesman on finance and planning Mark Golding says the government's current offer is way below the wage increase offered to public sector workers in 2015. He says what the Holness administration is now putting on the table is a retrograde step and an insult to public sector workers.
Paid public sector workers, the lowest paid public sector workers in 2015 were granted an increase of $1,000 a week by our administration. The then opposition spokesperson finance described the increase as an insult. See it? Public sector increase an insult. See it? See it? Come on.
He says the increase being offered to public sector workers isn't enough to maintain a reasonable livelihood in Jamaica.
The current minister said that $1,000 a week could only buy 2 chicken and 4 pounds of rice. Well, if that was the Shaw standard then, what can $600 or $425 or worse, $320 buy today? It can't even buy 1 maga chicken.
The opposition spokesman says the minister's attempt to include incremental increases in the wage offer is disingenuous.
It was disingenuous to mention the standard annual 2.5% performance increment, which has been in place for many years as part of the pay package being offered to the public sector workers, as if that is anything new. The 2.5% performance increment has always been part of the public sector remuneration, and even when there was no increase on basic pay. And in fact, not everyone gets the performance increment, as the teachers, the police, and others have pointed out. Boy, Mr. Speaker, what gone bad a morning can't come good a evening. You know? We are seeing it now, you know. It started bad in 2016 and it can't come good a evening.
Meanwhile, as teachers stayed away from the classroom for a second day as part of an unofficial industrial action, the Ministry of Labour intervened, trying to bring both parties back to the negotiating table. The ministry summoned the teachers to a meeting at its offices with representatives from the Finance Ministry. The meeting was slated for 2 p.m. However, the JTA responded saying despite their willingness to meet, due to the group structure, they were unable to put together a team with such short notice. The JTA then proposed that the meeting take place tomorrow, Wednesday, March 14 at 10 a.m. The Labour Ministry has accepted the new meeting time. Representatives from Credit Info Jamaica and the Jamaican Bar Association pointed out several flaws in the data protection bill this morning when they appeared before a joint select committee in Parliament. Here's more. The Data Protection Bill is a crucial part of the government's plan to digitize public services and general operations across the island. The implementation of the highly controversial National Identification System (NIDS) also depends on the successful passage of the bill in Parliament to work effectively. But according to CEO of Credit Info Jamaica Limited, Craig Stephen, there are still some fundamental issues which the bill fails to address.
There needs to be serious consideration for the harmonization of the Data Protection Act and the existing Credit Reporting Act, and the UK can be looked at as a model. I know we'd have looked at them for the Data Protection Act, but we can also look to see how they harmonize their act with their consumer credit.
Similarly, one representative from the Jamaican Bar Association, Nicole Foga, pointed out that the bill isn't supported by a clear policy to guide its operation.
Excited as we are to see a data protection bill laid before this honorable body, we are very concerned at both a macro level and a micro level with some of the provisions. Our first concern is the absence of a clearly articulated data protection policy.
Ms. Foga said a data protection policy would clear up some of the concerns surrounding the government's position on the bill and issues regarding access to information.
A policy could address the government's views on where the balance lies between freedom of information, open government data, and the right to use technology to improve business efficiency and effectiveness with the right to protection of privacy, of other property, and of communication guaranteed by the Constitution.
For BATV News, I'm Andrew Laidley. The Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports says it will be expanding its Economic Opportunities Initiative to other indigenous groups across the island. The program, which is already benefiting entrepreneurs of communities within the Blue and John Crow Mountains World Heritage Site, will be extended to Maroon Mountains in St. Elizabeth and Trelawney, beginning in the 2018-19 financial year. Portfolio Minister Olivia Grange says the initiative is part of the government's efforts to enable persons to tap into the business and income-generating potential within their communities in order to boost employment. She was speaking at the presentation of a $1 million grant funding to entrepreneurs from Portland, St. Andrew, and St. Thomas recently at the Jamaica Business Development Corporation, JBDC, in St. Andrew. The 20 recipients received $50,000 each to enhance their business operations in agriculture, craft, commodities, gastronomy, and tourist attractions. The Blue and John Crow Mountains was inscribed on the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization's UNESCO World Heritage List in July 2015. The region, which spans sections of Portland, St. Andrew, and St. Thomas, is renowned for its rich cultural heritage, being home to the Maroons, whose traditions are recognized by UNESCO as masterpieces of world culture. Now, still to come, Panjam Investment says Jamaica can hit its growth targets if the government can fix two problems. We'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. Panjam Investment says Jamaica could soon achieve the growth that it has long sought if the government is able to control crime and cut red tape. The company made the assertion as it released its consolidated financial statements for the year ended December 31, 2017. Kanil Gale has more.
Panjam Investments says net profit attributable to stockholders was just over $4 billion, an increase of 2% over the 2016 figure, while earnings per stock unit were $3.93. Property income increased 29% to $1.7 billion. Panjam says its property segment continues to contribute meaningfully to the group, posting $608 million of profit before tax. The company's investment management segment also did well in 2017, posting increased pre-tax profit of $3.4 billion. Total operating expenses for the year amounted to just under $1.5 billion, a 13% increase over the 2016 figure. Direct costs of property management increased 9% to $626 million, while staff costs increased by $115 million, influenced by higher bonus accruals. Finance costs increased 14% to $600 million, resulting from higher average debt balances, partially offset by lower interest rates. Total assets as at December 31, 2017 was $39.4 billion, some $7 billion more than the $32.4 that was recorded at the end of 2016. Meanwhile, the company says its 31.5% stake in Sagicor continues to generate the majority of its income from associated companies. In the meantime, Panjam points out that in addition to continued lower inflation, higher confidence, and a decline in debt to GDP, 2017 brought sharper improvements in two key growth drivers. Unemployment, previously improving at a measured pace, fell dramatically by 2.5% during 2017. Similarly, the 6-month Treasury bill rate fell by 1.93% to 4.63% during 2017. It has since fallen further to 3.59%. This is significant because the 6-month Treasury bill rate is a key benchmark in setting commercial borrowing rates. Looking ahead to 2018, Panjam says, given affordable financing and a greater number of persons employed and participating in the economy, the private sector will have a clear incentive to increase investment and therefore drive higher GDP growth. However, the investment company argues that a further ingredient for strong growth is a secure environment in which to operate. Several sectors also require faster and more transparent processes for regulatory and other facilitative approvals if they are to contribute to their full potential. Panjam says if the government takes the necessary steps to improve significantly in these two additional areas, Jamaica will soon enjoy the levels of GDP growth which it has long sought. For BATV News, I'm Kenil Gale.
The Scotia Group is reporting net income of $3.4 billion for the 3-month period ended January 31, 2018. This, the company says, represents an increase of $1.2 billion or 54% over the corresponding period last year. Javon Keys has more from the company's first quarter results report.
Scotia Group says the quarter's results include gains of $753 million from the sale of a subsidiary and asset tax expense of $1.1 billion. The group points out that the performance was largely driven by growth in its core business as well as gains from the sale of its microfinancing business, Credit Scotia. Total revenues excluding impairment losses on loans for the period was $11.6 billion, representing an increase of $1.5 billion or 15% above the previous year. Net interest income after impairment losses for the period was $6.6 billion, $437 million or 7% above the same period in 2017. Meanwhile, Scotia Group says year-over-year revenue growth was achieved in most of its business lines. Other income, that is, all income other than interest income, was $4.9 billion for the period, up $1.5 billion or 45% from last year. However, net fees and commission income went down $148 million to close the period at $2.1 billion. This, the bank says, was due to continuous customer education on alternatives to reduce fees coupled with increased free transactions. Insurance revenue increased by $566 million to $1.2 billion due to growth in the group's core insurance business. In the meantime, net gains on foreign currency activities and financial assets was $925 million, up $401 million above last year. Operating expenses ended the period at $6.4 billion, an increase of $415 million or 7% compared to the same period in the previous year. Salaries and staff benefit costs increased by $189 million. Total assets increased year-over-year by $21.9 billion, or 5% to $502 billion. While total liabilities were $397 billion as at January 31st, 2018, an increase of $13.4 billion or 3% from last year. This was driven by increases in the group's retail and commercial customer deposit base. The Scotia Group says its loans portfolio was $167.6 billion, down marginally from $168.2 billion last year due to an overall decline in its foreign currency portfolio. Moving forward, the Scotia Group says a key part of its strategy will be keeping its strong customer focus. This will see the group rolling out a new tool called Pulse over the next quarter, which will allow for more effective customer care. For BATV News, I'm Javon Keys.
The National Water Commission, NWC, says it has seen a marked reduction in the amount of potable water lost during transmission since hiring Mia Water Company from Israel to help tackle the problem. The $42.5 million non-revenue water co-management project, which is being implemented through funding from the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, aims to strengthen the institutional capacity of the NWC in order to improve its performance and maximize the collection of income for the water it produces. The project involves an audit of the NWC's network to determine the precise situation with regard to non-revenue water and how best to reduce these figures to about 30% within the 5th year of the project. In addition, 150 employees are being trained to ensure a highly skilled and dedicated non-revenue water management team at the NWC to allow for the ongoing use of best practices after completion of the project. The partnership agreement with Mio Water Company is expected to end in 2020. Now stay with us. Regional and international stories are next. Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. It's time for regional and international news. Barbados' finance minister is encouraging Bajans to pay closer attention to their investments, especially when it comes to insurance companies. More in this report.
Minister of Finance Chris Sinkler is encouraging residents to be more vigilant with insurance companies in Barbados and the region in an effort to safeguard against a similar CLICO debacle. Speaking to reporters following a tour of the new office of Resolution Life Assurance Company Limited at the Worthing Corporate Centre in Worthing, Christchurch on Wednesday, Sinkler said he had utmost confidence in the new company, which currently has 25 workers. Rest Life now controls a life insurance portfolio previously held by CLICO International Life Insurance Limited.
With good regulation, with companies that are operating appropriately, and with good vigilance of the public, because the public still has a responsibility to exercise vigilance outside of the regulatory authorities on companies that operate in Barbados and the Caribbean. I believe that a situation similar to what would have occurred with CLICO ought not to be repeated in Barbados.
European officials are pushing back on U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs, promising to protect EU jobs. Here's more.
Refusing to give in to trade bullies, the EU said it was ready to respond to controversial tariffs set by Donald Trump with restrictions of its own.
We don't like wars. We've got all bad experiences with wars, but of course we must be ready for any kind of countermeasures if it is confirmed that there is too much aggressivity from the other side.
The dispute was sparked by Trump's announcement last week that the U.S. would impose a 25% tariff on imported steel and a 10% tax on aluminum imports. In an attempt to diffuse tensions, the EU's trade commissioner met with her U.S. counterpart on Saturday, but the two sides were unable to reach an agreement. And on Monday, Donald Trump continued to accuse the EU of imposing unfair restrictions.
Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross will be speaking with representatives of the European Union about eliminating the large tariffs and barriers they use against the USA, not fair to our farmers and manufacturers.
Despite the escalation, Brussels still hopes it can strike a deal exempting it from the new tariffs, something which Mexico and Canada have already managed, even if the conditions under which these exemptions were given remain unclear.
A strike by teachers in Guinea, which has closed schools for more than a month, has provoked a mass protest by angry parents. Union leaders want the government to increase teachers' salaries as well as cut food and fuel prices. Al Jazeera's Victoria Gattenby reports.
Children in the capital Conakry recite the alphabet during a makeshift lesson in a dusty street. Amadou Sila's school is just meters away, but it's closed due to a pay dispute between teachers and the government.
It's been 1 month since we've been in school, so I have to teach the kids in the street. We have final exams, we have tests, and we're still waiting. We're sick of this.
It started in February when the government dismissed junior contract teachers who are not full-time employees or cut their salaries. Guinea's two largest teaching unions went on strike in protest. They want the contract teachers rehired and higher salaries for themselves. The government says in the current economic climate, those demands are unrealistic. It accuses the General Secretary of the Teachers' Union, Abu Babakar Souma, of exploiting the crisis for personal gain.
His demands are to give a 40% pay increase to every teacher, without distinction. He's hiding his only real motivation, which is that Mr. Souma wants to increase his own power.
Guinea's economy was already struggling before an epidemic of the Ebola disease cost it $500 million, 1/10 of its GDP. New taxes introduced by the government to deal with the deficit have hiked up prices and led to more strikes and protests calling for President Alpha Condé to step down.
I have 7 children at school and I have to pay the fees every month, whether there is school or not. If President Alpha Condé cannot settle this problem, let him hand over the presidency.
Pressure from the streets has brought the government to the negotiating table, but few expect concrete results. Amadou says the decision to take strike action was not taken lightly, but the education system, he says, is no longer fit for purpose. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera.
Talking Stocks is after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Time now for Talking Stocks. 50 stocks traded today, of which 15 advanced, 19 declined, and 16 traded firm. The main JC index declined by 1,442 points to close at 294,272 points, while the junior index declined by 5 points to close at 2,951. Over 11 million units traded, valued at more than $713 million on the Jamaican dollar market. And on the US dollar market, 5,000 units traded, amounting to $2,899. NCB Financial Group, with 6.8 million units changing hands, accounted for 61% of market volume. Victoria Mutual Investments was second with over 1.4 million units trading. Supreme Ventures, with over 482,000 units trading, accounted for 4% of market volume, crossing the floor. AMG Packaging and Paper was a top advancer, up 18 cents to close at $2.20, followed by Caribbean Producers Jamaica, up 22 cents to close at $9.22, and Dolphin Cove up 71 cents to close at $18. The main decliners were Separate Group, down $3.53 to close at $30.01, followed by Lasco Distributors losing 22 cents to close at $4.02, and Epley Limited 8.75% Insurance down 25 cents to close at $5.75. In foreign exchange trading, the Jamaican dollar gained on its main three counterparts today. The Jamaican gained 13 cents on the US dollar, which ended the day selling for $128.63. The Canadian, 25 cents, closing the day at $100.30. And the British pound lost 6 cents to sell for $176.18 on average. And that's the news, but before we go, a recap of our top story. Opposition spokesman on finance and planning Mark Golding says the government's offer to public sector workers is an insult. He says the finance minister is well aware that workers will not be able to make a reasonable living on the current offer the government is making. Thanks for watching. For more content, please visit our website at batvja.com. I'm Andrew Laidley. Pleasant viewing.